Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Astadia and Micro Focus webinar, featuring Redistributing Unisys Workloads to Microsoft Azure. During the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to type it into your chat box on your control panel, and we'll save it for the end of the presentation. We have an interesting presentation in store for you today, so let's get started. In today's webinar, we'll start off with an introduction to our experts. Next, we'll discuss some reasons why you might want to consider moving your Unisys workload to Azure. Following that, we will show you how to deploy it, and we'll showcase a live demo so you can see it in action. I'm sure this will draw up some questions that you have on your mind. So after the demo, we'll have a live Q&A session where you can talk to our experts. You definitely also want to stick around to the end, where we will tell you about a special offer that's exclusive just to the people on this webinar. Now to our presenters. Our first presenter is Craig Marble. Craig is the Senior Director here at Astadia. Craig brings with him 7 years resident experience at Astadia, but he's also spent over 16 years with our friends at Micro Focus. Craig knows all things about legacy modernization, and his experience lies in product pre-sales and delivery management. Our next presenter is Ed Airy. Ed is the Director of Solutions Marketing at Micro Focus. He has over 10 years of experience at Micro Focus, and he brings a whole lot more experience in the IT realm as well. His expertise lies specifically on application access, integration, and modernization. And his leadership is with product management and marketing, as well as the services side. Last but certainly not least is John Ullman. John is the Director of Astadia. John's been with Astadia for 27 years. With that, he brings a tremendous amount of experience in both Unisys and IBM mainframes, and he is our mainframe guru, so we're glad to have him on the call today. Without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Craig.
Thanks, Desiree, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm going to start out by giving just a little quick description of who Astadia is and what we do. So we're a premier technology consultancy and SI focused on giving a maximum impact and minimizing the risk of your technical ecosystem. And clients choose us for our experience, our agility, and our ability to deliver. We're not a huge company, so it makes us a little bit easier to work with, and it makes us more nimble in many ways. We have three main areas that we focus on. I'll first describe the develop arm of our solutions, and this includes things like implementing DevOps solutions for customers, setting up testing as a service environments, all the way to developing applications and web presence and mobile apps, things like that. We also have a managed services organization, and this managed services organization will manage your cloud environment, help you set up your cloud environment, but also manage on-premises infrastructure and also help desk operations. So if you have a help desk operation that is becoming a burden to you, you can farm it out to Astadia and we'll take over that operation for you. And then of course there's the migrate side, which is where the legacy modernization group falls in. We have a long history, and in fact, we cut our teeth on the Unisys mainframe 25 plus years ago. Actually started out as a mainframe productivity software development organization. So we actually still have some mainframe development products that we support today on the Unisys side. And we've done more than 90 mainframe migrations, because just like any company in the world, we have to adapt to changing trends. And the trend was moving away from mainframes to PCs. So we developed some PC development tools targeting the mainframe, and then eventually that moved into testing on the PC, but still targeting the mainframe. And then eventually that led to running applications off of the mainframe. So for the past 20 plus years, we've been moving application workload from Unisys and IBM onto Windows, Linux, and Unix, and then more recently to cloud platforms like Azure and AWS. So that's really what Astadia is about. I'll hand it over to Ed now to talk about Micro Focus.
All right, thank you, Craig, and hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Micro Focus and Astadia have been working together for a number of years. In fact, I think over 25 years, Craig, if memory serves me. So quite a while and working together to help organizations modernize business-critical applications. Micro Focus is a global software organization, over 4 billion in size, but our clarity, our focus is very specific. We help organizations leverage what has made them successful and carry that forward into the future. Said another way, effectively bridging the old and the new together. So effectively why we're here today is to talk about why Unisys workloads to Azure, and what are some of the drivers to help organizations or incentivize organizations to consider this type of project. Many of these projects are driven by cost reduction, effectively looking to reduce the cost of ownership of those applications, being able to find ways to optimize cost, rationalize an IT estate, particularly if there's an M&A activity. But what we also see very frequently is that the challenge that organizations face around locating, finding skilled Unisys developers, skilled resources. These are difficult to find on the market today. In many ways, it requires an investment in training and onboarding that type of talent. So it raises a lot of questions as to, well, continued investment in that technology if the resources are difficult to find. And as we'll discuss here today, there's going to be a greater focus around integration with .NET and Azure and certainly cloud-based technologies. That's becoming more commonplace, and that's the expectation of the business. So that becomes a bit more difficult to do, particularly on traditional Unisys hardware. So that's another driver for organizations to look at perhaps moving to a more modern platform. Now, if we just stop for a moment and take a look at Unisys as an organization, and a variety of different business units. They have a services group, of course, that many are familiar with. But if we take a look at the organization's performance as a whole, you can see that, unfortunately, it's a downward trend in terms of revenue and profit. And effectively, what this means is that as an organization goes through this type of journey, as you see here, there's just less funds, there's less resources available for innovation, for new technology, for new capability for its customers. So it raises again questions as to what is the future for Unisys, and again it opens the door for a conversation around cloud. So let's talk a little bit more about cloud adoption. Craig, I'll turn it back to you.
Right, thanks. Yeah, so we are seeing this incredible acceleration in moving to the cloud. I mean, you can see here, I won't go through each of these numbers one by one, but you'll see that at least 85% of customers, IT shops, are beyond the discovery phase with cloud, embracing the cloud. So we're looking at a compound annual growth rate of about 61.3% year over year, and that's pretty remarkable for new technology, or relatively new technology. It's been around for about 10 years or so, but it's really, the adoption has really ramped up lately, because what we saw initially were what you might call a first wave, were things like your development and test environment, being able to spin up machines, try something out, and then take it down, and you don't have to invest in hardware. You can try things out. If it fails, okay, no problem. You didn't have to go out and buy a server and a bunch of software and then end up just trying to find another purpose for that hardware and software. Then we saw people moving their websites and then their CRM application systems, and of course you've got Salesforce.com and other companies, human resource management companies that offer software as a service solutions, people moving marketing solutions out there. And then big data, right? A great place to put data and do a lot of crunching that you might not want to buy a bunch of hardware for, but analysis that you want to do. Then the second way, we saw people starting to embrace it for more things like backup and recovery, disaster recovery as a service, and then perhaps augmenting your on-premises computing when necessary. So maybe you have a monthly processing period, and you may struggle to get through that with your current infrastructure, and by extending that to the cloud, you're able to easily provide that extra capacity without investing in more hardware. And what we're seeing now, more recently, is really embracing the cloud for big iron, heavy, critical, high volume transaction applications such as legacy mainframe applications, ERP systems, things like that. So the adoption of cloud is really starting to accelerate, and we're seeing that regularly. See it happen more every year. So that begs the question: Is Azure ready for mainframe workload? And you know, a lot of times I myself have been guilty of saying, you know, the cloud is great for some things, but it's just not powerful enough to run enterprise mainframe workload. Indeed, the revelation came to me when I realized, you know what, we've been in business doing mainframe migrations to distributed platforms for quite some time, have over 90 successful migrations, and gosh, you know, the cloud is basically a giant distributed environment, and it has redundancy built in. It's the perfect place for it. So if you take a look at some of these facts here, 90% of the Fortune 500 companies, they do run enterprise level applications in Azure, and they do it successfully. And that chipset, the Intel x86 Intel AMD chipset, is proven that it's capable of running mainframe workload. It happens every day for companies who have already distributed their workload from the mainframe to distributed platforms. And then you have the advent of things like solid-state drives that really accelerate performance, especially for I/O operations. And then when you think of Azure specifically, they've got over 42, they've got data centers across 42 different regions. So a lot of redundancy, a lot of capability for failover, and clustering to ensure that your application is always available. So in short, the answer is yes, Azure is ready for mainframe workload. So the question is, how do you do it, right? So that is the logical next question, is how do I take my Unisys mainframe workload and move it to Azure? Well, this is something that we've been doing for a long time to the distributed platform, so it's not much of a stretch to extend that to the Azure environment. And we have this process that we have been using for over 20 years that is the proven and successful process, and that all starts with a discovery. So obviously, before you can get to where you want to go, you have to know where you are and what you have. So the first step is discovering your assets, what you have in terms of code and data, what software applications and packages you're running on the mainframe, all the processes around your mainframe development, and what the requirements are for the target environment, what the end state is, what the goal is. And with that, we start designing the architecture, we start designing the alternative databases and the interfaces and any customizations that have to be put into place. And all of this information moves into our transformation engine. And that transformation engine is used in the modernized phase, where we take the code and we apply automation to it to make the changes that are required to run this application within the Azure environment. And so we're talking about your code, static data. You may have some changes that need to be made to go from EBCDIC to ASCII, and any comp fields involved, and then apply that to all the different application components. And then, of course, you have to test all of this. Now, the good news is that you only have to test what you're changing. You don't have to test every single line of code like you do with a brand new written application. Some of the bad news is that a lot of times companies don't have the documentation or the test cases necessary to test anything other than maintenance enhancements. So there can be a bit of an effort there to get your testing house in order in this project. But some more good news is that those test cases then are valid moving forward for future projects. So it's not a sunk investment. It is something that you can leverage in the future. And then, of course, after you get all your testing done, you've done your performance testing, you've tested your interfaces work, the data is valid, and you've tested out the load balancing to make sure that you've got the right level of performance and reliability that you want, then you can implement the solution. And that is actually deploying the final pieces, migrating over all of the dynamic data, and doing a system cutover, and then, of course, putting monitoring in place to monitor the application. And then once that's done, Then you move into the management phase, managing the application in the Azure environment instead of on your mainframe. And then also maintaining that application in terms of enhancements going forward, which is pretty usual standard stuff. So what you're seeing now is a deployment architecture that we've developed, and this particular deployment architecture is the Unisys Libra that comes from the Burroughs side of the house. So on the top, what you see is the mainframe environment. So you've got your batch, your comms app, processing environment, and the languages that you typically would find, and such as COBOL, XGen, which is a tool that we have, generation 4GL that generates COBOL. You got Algol, AB Suite, which was Link, Whiffle, so on and so forth. And then you've got data files, flat files, and then of course your big database, which would most likely be DMS2. And then of course everything that supports that, the security, the code versioning, scheduling, printing and sorting, and that all sits on top of the operating system, which sits on top of the mainframe. And then that is all accessed through either a T27 screen emulator, or perhaps you've done some work to make it available through a browser, or maybe you've got some custom user interfaces that work on a networked environment in a Windows environment, or maybe even a Linux environment. So you have these interfaces into that mainframe environment. Well, you deploy that into Azure very much the same way. So we have something we call the Mainframe Cloud Framework. And that Mainframe Cloud Framework consists of the Micro Focus Visual COBOL tool and the COBOL server runtime in conjunction with our OpenMCS product, which emulates the Unisys mainframe environment on Windows and Linux. So you have your batch applications that move down to COBOL and the XGen. Things like Algol, you typically are going to rewrite because Algol is not something that will run on a distributed environment. So the Algol does have to be converted. But some of the other stuff like AB Suite can come down with the AB Suite product for distributed. The Whiffle will be changed to PowerShell scripts, or maybe there is a distributed scheduler that you want to implement. The data, the sequential files, the flat files, they can come down just like they are. They can stay flat, or you can actually make them relational if you want to, which we tend to do because it makes it easier for other applications to access, because that's one of the great reasons to put your application in the cloud is for easy integration with other applications. The database would move over to something like Azure SQL, or SQL Server, or an Oracle database running in Azure, and that of course does require some conversion to go from the hierarchical paradigm to the relational paradigm. But that's something we've done many times, and it's you know, I won't say it's something that you snap your finger and it happens that easy, but it is not a monumental task. And then, of course, along with these applications, you may choose to deploy it in one instance, or maybe you're going to set up several instances that you use in the application load balancer that you see there on the left at the top underneath the VNet. You're going to use Azure AD to do your authentication. And then you may have some C# applications or Java applications you could run next to that legacy application in the virtual machine, or maybe you're going to set up a machine that's just for your legacy application. Your possibilities really are limitless, and it just depends on your particular circumstance. And then, of course, you've got all the supporting pieces that you had on the mainframe, things like storage, access control, monitoring, versioning, security, things like that. And the nice thing is, and the great thing is by taking this sort of lift approach and then shifting it and dropping it onto a new platform, you can use those same interfaces that you already had in place. So your interfaces, whether they were custom UIs or T27 screens or web screen, browser-based screens, instead of pointing to the mainframe, they'll just point to your Azure environment. And there's very little disruption to your users. In fact, in most cases, they don't even know that the application has moved. They just know that it's working like it always has. And in many cases, it actually works faster than it did before. So, of course, Unisys has two mainframe lines. So this image is the Dorado line, which comes from the Sperry side of the house. It's very similar, but there are some differences. So instead of comms, you're going to have TIP. You're going to possibly have some MASM, which needs to be rewritten. There'll be some mapper, which we also have a solution for to convert to Java. And then, of course, the ECL instead of WIFL. But you're still going to have the flat files, and then you're going to have your hierarchical database as DMS, and perhaps a relational database in RDMS. Same kind of paradigm in terms of the supporting pieces, and then it's going to be running on OS 2200 instead of NCP. Similar to the Burroughs side, you have the same type of user interfaces. It could be a custom user interface. It could be a terminal emulator with a UTS protocol, or it could be a web-based interface. And it deploys literally, virtually the same. You've got the batch, our OpenMCS product to emulate the Unisys environment. The COBOL comes down. You get the C, C++, and the Java that can run alongside it, and the PowerShell that maybe you're going to use instead of a scheduler, or maybe you're going to use a scheduler product. Data files move down. They can also be converted to relational. And then the same kind of thing with the database. You can move it into the Azure SQL or the SQL Server or Oracle. Just depends on your particular needs. So very similar there. And the same is true with the interfaces once it gets deployed as it was for the Burroughs side. You're just going to point to a different environment and things are going to work the way they did before. So you may have a portfolio that is just too darn big to move all at once. It is easier in many cases to do a big bang if you are the right size, but there are times where you just have too many applications. It's too much to do all at once. In those instances, you are probably going to have to do some cross-premises deployment, meaning the applications running in Azure need to communicate with your Unisys mainframe. So there is a solution for that using Microsoft products, things like IPsec and ExpressRoute, which gives you a direct tunnel to your Azure environment from your own environment. So that is possible. What you're looking at right now, this grid, is a basic description of your source environment and how it maps to the target environment. So MCP and OS 2200 is going to be replaced by the Azure environment running in Windows or Linux, whatever works best for you. Comms and TIP will be replaced by our OpenMCS product. This is a proven product. It's been around for 20 plus years and is used globally today. The COBOL and the XGen will move over to COBOL, and maybe there's some Java conversion that happens or some C# conversion that happens if that's necessary. Same with the Algol and the MASM. They can be converted to COBOL. Maybe it's easier to put everything in COBOL, or maybe you want to convert it to C# or Java, or maybe some of those functions are actually replaced by Windows or Linux OS functions. So you may not need it at all. The AB suite and the link, you can convert that to C# or Java. And then the Biz mapper can be converted to C# and Java. The WIFL and the ECL, again, you can use scripting or a scheduler or PowerShell. And then, as I mentioned, the databases move over to the Azure databases or the SQL Server databases, Oracle, DB2, LUW, etc. And the flat files can come over as is, or they can be converted to relational as well. So as I mentioned, one of the key pieces of this is OpenMCS. So OpenMCS runs Unisys in a Windows, Linux, or Unix environment. It is a scalable transaction replacement for comms and TIP. It's a transaction monitor for comms or TIP applications. It is a proven technology that runs today globally, and it does have support for Azure, as you're going to see in a few minutes. As part of this, we may also have some XGen that doesn't really apply to 2200s. It applies mostly to Burroughs. But if you have XGen applications, those XGen applications will move over as well, and you can continue to use XGen like you use it today. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Ed to talk about some of the software that we use from Micro Focus for these projects.
All right, thank you, Craig. So yes, let's talk a little bit about application analysis and a tool referred to here as Enterprise Analyzer. Effectively, as Craig has outlined here, that you want to start from a point of discovery and understanding. So there are lots of different complexities and intricacies within your application portfolio, and you need to understand the impact of change. Beyond that, you also need to understand what you have and what you don't in terms of considering moving a workload from one environment to the next. So this is effectively what this tool enables you to do, particularly from a technical user perspective, from an analyst perspective, from a developer perspective. What are the relationships between your application modules today, and what is the impact of change? If you go to the next slide, Craig, effectively what this will show you through a series of builds is it gives you a very complex view of your application portfolio to start. Of course, bringing all the different modules into play, it's a static analysis tool in many ways. But it gives you the way of filtering those views so that you have a more simplistic view of your application, those relationships between modules and programs, and then the granularity to drill down and look at specific attributes of those programs, and again, understanding the impact of change, both upstream and downstream. So it's a very powerful tool from a developer's perspective. You know where to make the changes that are needed, but then also from a business user's perspective, as you can see here through the charts and the source code repository, it gives you a variety of different views to understand how those applications fit together, and again, the relationships between those applications. So it can be very powerful to share information, but then in terms of planning and change, and particularly for a project of scale of moving to the cloud, it gives you the tools you need and the understanding you need to take action. Now, the tools that allow you to take that action are referred to as Visual COBOL. This is a set of development and deployment tools integrated with your choice of, again, Visual Studio or Eclipse, but designed to enable you to make a development change, perform testing, be able to modernize your application. So for example, be able to apply web services or REST or other different architectures to your application as you advance that system into a cloud architecture. So it gives you lots of flexibility here, particularly when we talk about deployment. One of the areas of Micro Focus COBOL that is unique is portability. So you aren't locked into one model. You have multiple models to pick from in terms of how you deploy your applications. What we're seeing now is more of a move through customers embracing .NET and Java bytecode, particularly as they move closer to the cloud. It provides in many ways a tighter integration with back office systems. It gives more flexibility for modernization, but underpinning it all is the same Micro Focus COBOL technology, where you write once and again have the flexibility to deploy anywhere. So let's take a closer look now, I think, Craig, at a demonstration, right? We're going to see this in action.
That's right. Thanks, Ed. Yeah, so we're going to hand it over to John Oman now. And John Oman, it's going to take him a couple seconds to pick up control of the webinar. But John is going to show us a real Unisys mainframe application running in Azure. So John, we'll hand it over to you, and we can see your screen. It looks great.
Thank you, Craig. Yes, welcome everybody. I am going to demo in a live form here, so we'll see what happens. What I'm going to show you is first a emulation into our mainframe. We have an LX machine running an application we wrote over 20 years ago and parts that are still in use today, running on this mainframe. I'm going to show you some of the modules using Visual Studio, show you some of the modules we had to bring down that we converted using our tools and got it working on the Windows environment. I am going to take you over to an Azure instance or the dashboard for Azure and give you a little tour of what we're looking at. Give you a little tour also of our OpenMCS product and show you the background SQL that's creating the records that the onlines are creating and updating, and then give you a little basically the same emulation into the Azure environment, and you can see the results are the same. Anyway, here is a mainframe, which for you mainframe folks should look very familiar. logging on, going on the window, presents to us the main menu. And here is a customer tracking system we wrote, like I said, many years ago, which keeps track of customers and calls and problems that the customer reports and basically call tracking. We have 3 customers out in the database. We have Acme, we have Oceanic, we have Wayne Industries. So if I want to, say, add a customer, I do an add cust, test contact, test company, put a phone number in, and a support person. So we're going to add a customer. We added it. Then if this customer calls in, we can do a add call for test company. We have to add a contact name. And a description of what the call is about. And we go back to a list of open calls, and here's our call that we added. So you're seeing it's actually updating a DMS2 database in the call tracking system. So the modules involved here are several. We brought the modules down, and here's a Visual Studio project that we use to compile these programs using our tools and this transformation engine that Craig talked about. We brought down, first off, we brought down the database. We have the DASDL, which shows the data sets. In the DASDL, we run it through our tool and we convert it to our SQL database. So we come out with tables containing all the columns and tables and indexes from our DASDL. Also involved in this is datacom. So we have a C file which contains the comms configuration file entries, database programs, etc. And if you're familiar with Unisys, you're familiar with this type of file. We convert that to an OpenMCS config file, which is an XML. So it's very easy to load this into our OpenMCS and have everything configured basically automatically. All the programs, windows, agendas, processing items, installation data, and the like. Also, for the onlines, we brought down screens. For instance, here's a copy of the menu screen in our environment where we can edit it. Then we brought down batch COBOL. We have several batch programs we used in this system. There's many more, but this is what I brought down. And then we also have online programs, including a processing item in that we converted to COBOL, processing item out. So if you want to look at a program, you just click on it. It lists the COBOL. If you want to compile the program, you right-click the program and you can compile it. And very quickly, it compiled the program. Say you want to compile your whole project. You right-click and do a rebuild on your project. It will go through and compile all the modules. And very quickly, we did 14 COBOL programs compiled successfully, and everything just got recompiled. Very nice debug utility here, like list customer. If I step into list customer, I am now stepping through the code of list customer. And what it allows you to do, notice down here in the autos window is the values in the items that just got updated. So date format got brought in from the system with the date and time, and as you step through and you can see the results of the statement that just executed in the autos window. Also, if you see a problem, you can actually go in and change the value of a data name so that you don't have to go in and modify your code right then, and you can just continue on and test. Very nice feature that's easy to debug. It helps speed up the process of getting code to work. So that is the process in which we brought the programs down to the Windows environment. The next step is Azure. We have a dashboard for the Azure environment here. We brought our database down and created a database in the Azure environment. We also brought our legacy modernization, we call it base for our base virtual machine. And there's many features here that you can get into, which we're not going to do today. The main one that's of interest is the load balancer, where you can split out many machines running the workload. And using the elastic load balancer, you can go from 1 instance to 12 instances of the same box. Whenever it gets busy, it will fire up extra resources and take the load and spread it out. The first thing we're going to do is look at the database machine that we created. Here is a picture of the database machine. And you have pricing tiers. We're at the basic 5 DTU, database transaction units, I believe it stands for, which is a very low level pricing level. But when you find your database is becoming active and it's becoming slow, you can go in here to the pricing tier, and very quickly you have your basic level, you have your standard, your premium, and your premium RS. So right now I'm at the basic level, which is costing me roughly $4.99 a month to maintain. If I go to standard, I can go from DTUs up to higher levels, and the price goes up, plus the amount of storage. Same with premium and premium RS. So very quickly you can just apply the changes, and with a reboot in maybe 5 to 10 minutes, you're back up and running at a higher level of machine that can support maybe a big job you're running or whatever. The next thing we're going to look at is the base, LegMod base, which is our virtual machine where we're running our OpenMCS in. We're running here at the basic A2 level. 2 virtual CPUs, 3.5 gigabytes of memory. It shows you a lot of good charts on the activity going on in the machine. We have CPU, network, disk operations, so on and so forth. Here's the IP address, you'll notice, of the machine. So I can actually do a remote desktop login to that IP address, and this is the actual virtual machine running. I'm logged into it. If I need to do something here, I'm just a user on a Windows box at this point. I really don't need to do much here. It is running our MCS, and if we find that it's becoming slow, we can just click on size, and we're running the basic A2, which is all the way down here. Basic A2, two virtual CPUs, 3.5 gigabytes, and you can up that or lower it depending on your budget and how much work you want to get done. You have many levels that you can go to, all the way from one CPU on up. And just you click on one, you apply it, it reboots your machine, and within 5 minutes you have a brand new box running more CPUs or more memory or whatever you would like. So with that, running the OpenMCS there, I go to my local browser, wrong button, sorry. Go to my local browser, which is right here, showing our OpenMCS or WebMCS interface. Here's the same IP address that we saw that was in the machine that we were running the OpenMCS. We see that it's running. The CPU units, the CPU percentage is 11 right now. I can go in and view the log of the MCS that's running there, the user log, application log, or the MCS log. I can also look at a statistics screen which shows all the modules are enabled, how many copies of each program are running, min and max of the programs. I can see the queues of how many transactions are queued and how many it's processed. Then I can switch over to our emulator to access the environment running on Azure. So here I can log in. Here I can log in. Okay. Well, it's a real demo. It's not working. There we go. So I sign on to a window, and I get the same screen that you saw on the mainframe, and we're talking to the Azure environment. To prove that, if I go over here to the stats screen, you'll notice that I processed a transaction in the main online through the queue. So I can do the same transaction, so I can inquiry on my customers, and I just aborted. Oh, good. Well, anyway, again, it looks just like the mainframe, especially when it aborts. Transaction caused program to abort. Sorry about that. It was working a little while ago. Not sure what happened here, but anyway. As you can see, the screens do look the same. I'm not sure why I can't. Oh, here we go. Okay, we're adding a call now. And we get the same list of transactions. So the screens look a lot alike, and everything is there. If I go to the SQL Server solution that remember, I'm connected from my PC into the Azure environment. So here are my tables I created. Here's the customer table. Here is the top. So many rows out of a table. I have my 3 customers. If I go to my phone call record, which I added a new call, I can take a look there and see the fact that I have added here's my test call that I added just now. So you can see that it actually updated my SQL Server database. So again, we showed the mainframe running the application. We showed the modules that we brought down. We showed the tour of the Azure environment and our MCS and the SQL Server. And that's basically it for the demo. Back to Craig.
Great. Thanks, John. Appreciate that. I think it's pretty powerful what we just saw, aside from the small hiccup, which happens a lot of times with live demos and demo applications. But I think it's powerful, the idea of being able to try out your application, especially in your development process, but even in your production environment. If you find that you just don't have enough horsepower, it's very easy to up your horsepower and your processing capacity without buying a bunch of new hardware. And maybe you have the time or 2 a month where you need that extra power and you use it, and then you dial it back and you're able to scale down and reduce your expenses. So it's some really powerful stuff. I appreciate it. Thanks, John. So Desiree, I think we are now ready to head over to the Q&A.
Thanks, Craig. Just a quick reminder, if you have a question to ask our experts, feel free to type it into the chat box on your screen. Now let's address some of the questions we've been receiving throughout the presentation. Our first question is from Robert. He wants to know, what's the most difficult part of a project like this?
Well, so we get this asked a lot, and you might be surprised to to hear that the technology is not the most difficult part. Certainly, there are technological challenges, but they are, for the most part, relatively easy to overcome. In reality, and the most diplomatic way to say this is that a lot of times the biggest hurdle to overcome is human resources. And what I mean by that is a lot of times your folks who have been doing their jobs and doing them very well have to learn to work in a new environment and work in a new paradigm, and it can be scary for them. Some of them will think, "Oh my gosh, we're going to go to the cloud. I'm not going to have a job anymore," or, you know, "I like doing things the way I do them today. I don't want to do something new," and that needs to be overcome. Because the fact of the matter is those employees have knowledge beyond just the mainframe. They have knowledge about your institution, how you do your job, how you operate your business, and how your applications work. And that knowledge carries forward into the cloud, into the Azure environment. So they will still be developing. They'll be using different tools, but they'll be using the same code base. And that is important for them to understand that. So that really is really, in my opinion, the biggest challenge.
All right. Catherine has a question. She says, don't you have to change a lot of source code to get Unisys applications working in Azure?
Right. So that is a common perception that, oh my gosh, you know, there's so many code changes that are required to make this work. It's just high risk, and I might as well just rewrite the whole thing. Well, that simply isn't true. And that's the reason that we have tools like Visual COBOL and OpenMCS. It allows you to make these kinds of changes with a minimum of code modifications. So the answer is yes, you do have to make some code changes. Where you have to make code changes are obviously around the database calls, because you're going to be going from a hierarchical database environment to a relational environment. And then there will be some changes required to handle the differences between EBCDIC and ASCII, for example, sorting. So there will be changes around there, but those areas are fairly easy to identify. And the great thing is that once you change them in one place, that change can be propagated in other programs. So it makes it a lot easier. Also, using automation to make those changes, as I mentioned earlier in the process slide, also makes it a lot easier. So there are some changes required, but not as much as you might think, and it is very, very manageable, and that's just what we do.
That makes sense. The next question is from Chen in Boston. He's wondering, how difficult is it to convert DMS2 databases to relational?
Mm-hmm. So it's not as hard as you might think. You know, we've been doing it for a long time. We have tools that we have developed over the past 20-some years where a customer gives us their Dazzle and their schemas, and then we are able to use those tools to automatically generate relational databases and schemas. Now, it's not magic, right? We obviously have to validate it. We find issues, we make tweaks, we run it through again, and it's a bit of an iterative process until we get it right. But once it's done right, then those same tools will help us, will generate code to actually move the data over. So a lot of it is done through automation. So it's with help from somebody like us, it's really not all that difficult to do.
Okay. It looks like we have time for one more question because I want to make sure that we get to the special offer as well. So the last question is from Greg. He is interested in knowing if he can evaluate the software solution today and where can he download a trial.
Okay, I'll let you start that one off.
Sure, sure. So certainly, and as it pertains to the Enterprise Analyzer, the application analysis product that we discussed, and the visual COBOL technology that you saw John demo, you can access downloads, free trials for each of those from microfocus.com. And again, you'll be able to access a 30-day trial for each of those products. They also come with documentation and access to support along the way with your trial. MCS though, Craig, I think might be a different path.
Yeah, like I said, the visual COBOL stuff, if you just wanted to play around with some generic COBOL in Azure, it would be very easy to do. When you're dealing with Unisys mainframe COBOL, there are some pieces that are required that are supplied by the OpenMCS, and that requires some more configuration and is a little more complicated. So that the best way to learn more about that is quite frankly to contact us at Astadia, and we can walk you through it.
All right, great. I mean, that concludes the question portion of the webinar. For more information, we have definitely have a lot of content on our website that you can check out. So our Unisys to Azure reference architecture paper, you can click on Cloud GPS and you will find it there. So definitely want to make sure that you should take a look at that. That is a fairly huge document where we list all of that important information and kind of walk you through it. Also, we have upcoming webinars that you want to make sure that you keep your eye out for. We have a migrating IBM mainframe to AWS, as well as migrating IBM mainframe to Azure, both very specific to those individual platforms. And we will be doing the same thing where we're going to walk you through what the considerations for you guys to do this, as well as show you a live demo. Definitely keep your eyes out for that. And now to the special offer. Craig or Ed, do you want to go through the special offer?
Yeah, I'll let Ed take that.
Sure, absolutely. Yes, very exciting, as you mentioned, Desiree. So for the folks that have joined us here today, there's an opportunity to take advantage of the value profile assessment. And effectively what this is, and it really blends well with some of the discussion that Craig led earlier around the need for discovery. And effectively what this assessment is about is sitting down with experts from Astadia and Micro Focus and getting a better understanding of your application estate today, your inventory, effectively the workload that you'd be considering to move to the cloud. Getting a better understanding of the relationships, the technology that underpins it, but then also the resources, as we talked a little bit about. What does it take to support that application today? What might it take to support that application if it's in the cloud? So the outcome of this conversation, the outcome of this discovery meeting is a roadmap, effectively a path forward as to understanding what it will take from a technology perspective, but then also from a resourcing perspective to support these applications running in an Azure environment. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about this assessment and signing up, for an opportunity to sit down and get started, please reach out to us here at info@astadia.com, and we'll be in touch with you with next steps.
Great, thanks, Ed.
All right, well, appreciate that, Ed. So this webinar replay will be available on the website next week for you to download on demand. If you're looking for more information specifically, please feel free to email info@astadia.com. And any final remarks from the presenters?
No, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today, and also like to thank Ed and John for their help. And I hope everybody found this good information for them, and just appreciate the time.
Wonderful. We appreciate everyone joining us today to learn more about this topic, and we look forward to you joining us for our next webinar. Goodbye.